We've set up in the Big 12 in recent days here on Mark Rogers TV as we commit to our vow to knock out every Power 5 conference schedule in America before opening night on Thursday, August 28th. We've knocked out the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 10. And again, we are in the Big 12, and we make our next stop in Fort Worth with the TCU Horned Frogs. TCU, once a prime BCS buster along with Boise State, now part of the establishment of the Big 12 Conference, and had a heartbreaker 2 years ago in the bowl game against Michigan State, the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl, in culminating a 7-5 campaign. And then their season full of heartbreakers in 2013. Look at the game log. TCU at 4-8 could have turned around a few other games with some plays at quarterback and on defense. The defense was extremely strong, but didn't make quite as many big plays in the backfield as they had the previous seasons, and certainly unrested quarterback. They lose Devontae Fields on defense, but the defense should again lead this team to, hopefully, for Horned Frogs followers, a TCU championship in the Big 12, or certainly contention. Let's look at the non-conference slate. It's formidable. It's not great. I typically like to see strong Power 5 conference teams, and I'll move TCU into this category. They're kind of a mid-tier Big 12 school at this point, coming off, again, 4-8, and 2 years ago, a bowl team that I'd like to see them play a very strong Power 5 conference team, and then kind of a lackluster Power 5 conference team, and then the other two non-conference games. For the other conferences, they've got four. The other two non-conference games, go ahead and beat up on a MAC school or beat up on a subdivision school. So for TCU in the Big 12, again, 9 conference games. The Big 12 with 10 teams plays the purest conference slate of anybody in the country with 9 conference games. So everybody plays everybody. So I've got less analysis because I don't have to break down all those games that aren't happening in the other conferences that bring such a discrepancy between the schedules. In the Big 12, not by design, but by default, they do it right with only 10 teams. Okay, so Samford, Minnesota, SMU. So I'm intrigued by the Minnesota game in Fort Worth. The Gophers coming off an 8-5 campaign in the Big 10. They only went 4-4 in the Big 10, though. Lost a heartbreaker to Syracuse in the Texas Bowl last year. Minnesota should be back about to the same level this season, but probably the record won't show it as it gets tougher with Michigan and Ohio State on Minnesota's schedule. But enough about the Gophers. That's a sound game for TCU to play in Week 2 at home after they play Samford at home. Then they go to Dallas to take on SMU, and I think that's a really good matchup for TCU to keep those ties within the state, even if they're playing a team that, based on conference, is a rung beneath them. The SMU-TCU game's a good one, and I applaud that one, as well as SMU playing Texas A&M and some other heavyweights across the state. Samford, Minnesota, SMU, TCU would expect to go 3-0, although Minnesota is going to be tricky at home. The Gophers will not explode on offense. They're going to have difficulty scoring and making big plays in the passing game against TCU. And then the game at SMU is no gimme as well, although Garrett Gilbert has moved on from SMU at quarterback. Then the Horned Frogs, again, most likely at 3-0, possibly at 2-1, go into conference play right into the deep end with a game at home against Oklahoma. TCU played the Sooners extremely tough the last 2 years. Almost could have won those games. Almost did win those games. The Big 12 says, let's load it up. Let's front load this TCU schedule. Oklahoma at Baylor, Oklahoma State. So 3 extremely difficult games. TCU could lose 2 of those 3 and still possibly stay in the conference race for a tie for the championship. It would be difficult to imagine them losing 2 games, and one to Oklahoma and Baylor being the other one, and they would lose a tiebreaker to get to a BCS bowl game. Okay, so they play those 3 difficult games out of the gate. Then the 4th game is no gimme in Texas Tech at home. Then down the stretch, they get a breather with West Virginia, Kansas State, at Kansas, Texas, and Iowa State. So the Big 12 is a pretty good conference. I know it's taken a lot of bashing in recent years, and it's not what it used to be with some of the defections. Okay, but Oklahoma's extremely strong. Definitely a top 10 team. Baylor, a fringe top 10 team, possibly top 15 team, something in that range. Oklahoma State's a fringe top 25 school. Texas Tech's more in the 30 to 35 range, along with West Virginia probably in the top 50. Kansas State, Texas are fringe top 25 schools, top 30 range. Kansas, Iowa State are pushovers, and TCU's got to win those games. The two that they have to win, of course, are at Kansas and the finale against Iowa State in Fort Worth. The games that are probably losses, probably 85 to 90% certainties, are the games against the Sooners and the Baylor Bears. The other ones are toss-ups: Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, West Virginia, Kansas State, and Texas. Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, West Virginia, Kansas State, and Texas. They've got 3 of those 5 at home. They need to win 3 of those 5 games, so that brings them to 3-2 in the conference. Say they lose to the Sooners and the Bears, they're 3-4. They finish 5-4 in the Big 12. They probably sweep the other 3. That's an 8-4 campaign for TCU, and they get to a decent bowl game. Pull off a couple upsets, and it's not unimaginable that TCU could go 6-2 in the Big 12 and go 10-2 overall. I think that's the ceiling. Lose to Baylor and Oklahoma most likely. Maybe pull off an upset between one of those two and lose to somebody else. But again, 6-2 in the Big 12 and 10-2 overall. Or it would be 7-2 in the Big 12. My apologies. 9-game conference schedule. 7-2, 10-2 overall. That's the ceiling. I think the bottom is something close to what we saw last year. Unfortunately, TCU could lose a ton of close games because of issues at quarterback and because of a pretty balanced Big 12 conference after you get past Oklahoma and Baylor. Again, you bunch up Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, Kansas State, Texas, and TCU as comparable teams. And if TCU, the ball doesn't bounce its way for a second consecutive season, you could see 3-5 in the Big 12. You could see a loss outside of conference, and you could see a 6-6 campaign. Or again, 3-6 in the Big 12, I should say, with the 9 conference games. Tough to get used to after combing through the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC. So for TCU, I think it's a 7-5 football team as they try to turn the tables on some of those close losses in 2013. All right, TCU fans, let's step up. Let's talk some TCU football. Would love to hear your comments, your insight, and your analysis right here on Mark Rogers TV.